Augustus Veil had been watching her long before she ever saw him. From the high road, through the fog, from behind his carriage glass. And by the time Catherine realized it, he already owned everything. The marsh, her cottage, even the silence she had once called her own. Timothy was gone. 2 years of promises, and not a single letter had reached her. And by now, his brother stood in his stead, offering her a choice that did not feel like one at all. The next morning, contracts were signed in Ely, and within days, Augustus Veil had legally acquired nearly the entire Black Fence territory, including Catherine's cottage. She learned of it when men arrived carrying official papers and measuring chains through her garden. "You cannot do this," she cried out. Augustus stood calmly near the carriage while workers hammered new boundary markers into the wet earth. "My dear Catherine," he replied almost gently, "ownership is precisely how civilization functions." The weeds hissed softly in the wind behind her. Augustus stepped in closer. "You have survived here admirably," he admitted, "but survival is such a crude thing for a woman like you. You may continue starving in the mud," and then his eyes drifted towards the cottage, "or you may come to Ely as my ward." His words sounded less like kindness and more like acquisition. "I'll give you silk," Augustus continued quietly, "warmth, education, and security." He paused, "and in return, you will help me understand this land." Catherine felt cold despite the humid air. "You speak of the marsh as though it belongs to you." Augustus smiled faintly. Everything belongs to someone eventually, and by the end of the month, Catherine found herself inside the Veil mansion, overlooking the industrial districts of Ely. Hi loves, welcome. If you're just joining, part 1 is linked in the description below, so you can easily understand how we got to this moment. If you're new here, please don't leave without giving this video a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel. Servants dressed her in elaborate gowns. She could barely breathe inside. Augustus insisted constantly on refinement. She must be civilized, he told the house staff, not displayed like some wandering pagan. But no amount of silk transformed the way society looked at Catherine. At the first ballroom gathering, conversations faltered when she entered. Noble women watched Catherine over jeweled fans with poorly hidden disgust. Men stared longer, out of curiosity, as if Augustus had dragged some mythical creature from the marsh and taught it to wear pearls. Catherine hated every second of it. The perfume in the ballroom felt too thick, the laughters felt too sharp, the walls too close together. She missed the reeds, she missed silence, and most painfully of all, she missed Timothy. Augustus approached her midway through the evening carrying champagne. "You're adapting beautifully," he said. Catherine turned towards him coldly. "Where is your brother?" The question amused him. Oxford suits Timothy better than the dreadful marshes ever could. Something in that tone made her stomach tighten. And then Augustus leaned closer. "You truly believed his scholarship was a coincidence?" Catherine stared startled. "I funded Oxford myself," Augustus admitted. "A worthwhile investment." Her heartbeat slowed painfully. "Why?" she asked. Augustus swirled the champagne in his glass. "Because my brother develops attachment to impossible things." The meaning struck her instantly, and for the first time since arriving in Ely, genuine fear crept into her chest. Later that evening, Augustus gathered investors inside the ballroom mirrors while discussing industrial expansion plans. The men spoke quietly about real profits and underground extraction systems. One investor laughed while glancing towards Catherine standing alone near the edge of the room. "So that's the famous Fen-Wraith?" Another smirked. "She looks almost civilized." Augustus took a slow sip from his glass before saying casually, "A swamp-born hallucination dressed in silk." Men burst into laughter. That same night, one of his investors vanished. The man had retired drunk to his locked bedroom shortly after midnight. Servants discovered the room empty before dawn. The windows remained bolted shut from inside, but the wet footprint crossed the carpet, out through the corridor, down the mansion staircase and into the rain beyond the estate grounds towards the marsh. No body was ever found. Publicly, Augustus dismissed the disappearance as drunken wandering, but privately, he began locking certain doors within the mansion. As winter settled over Ellie, Catherine herself began physically changing. The city weakened her. Her skin grew pale beneath candle lights. Exhaustion settled constantly beneath her eyes. At first, she believed illness was overtaking her, until she discovered Augustus' hidden workshop beneath the factory districts. Massive mechanical engines thundered endlessly below the ground, while strange copper conduits carried heated vapor from sealed chambers filled with glowing fen minerals harvested illegally from the deep marsh deposits. Engineers refer to the phenomenon as fen resonance. Augustus believed certain ancient peat formations stored naturally occurring energetic frequencies capable of amplifying industrial outputs, and somehow Catherine herself intensified the effects, as years within the marsh had attuned her body to it in ways no scientists fully understood. The closer Augustus kept her, the stronger the machines became, but the weaker she felt. One evening, she overheard the engineers speaking behind iron doors. The readings spike whenever she enters the eastern wing. It is as though the land itself responds through her. No, another corrected nervously, through proximity to her. That was the moment Catherine finally understood that Augustus had never brought her to Ellie out of compassion. Months later, during a grand industrial gala, celebrating the expansion of the Vale Industries, Catherine finally saw Timothy again, and the moment their eyes met across the ballroom, the years between them collapsed all at once. Timothy looked older now, sharper at the edges. Oxford had dressed him in refinement, but exhaustion lingered beneath his eyes the moment he saw her standing beside Augustus. Catherine turned away fast, and immediately he followed, finding her moments later alone near the eastern balcony where the rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling. "You never wrote to me," she said before he could speak. Timothy stared at her in disbelief. "Catherine, I wrote every week." She laughed once, bitterly. "Do not insult me with pity now." "Pity?" His voice cracked softly for the first time. "I crossed half of England trying to return to you." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I sent letters for 2 years, poems, sketches, even that pressed moonflower you loved near the widow's mare." Catherine's expression faltered. Instantly, he knew. "You never received them." Silence followed. Slowly and horribly, both of them realized at the same time it was Augustus. Timothy looked towards the crowded ballroom where his brother stood laughing among investors, and for the very first time in his life, Timothy understood that Augustus had never sent him to Oxford out of generosity. He had removed him deliberately. But across the ballroom, Augustus was already watching them, and the look in his eyes no longer resembled brotherhood. It resembled possession. Augustus became consumed by Catherine in ways even the closest people to him began noticing, and the more Augustus tried controlling the black fence, the more the land itself seemed to resist him. Flood waters destroyed newly built rail foundations 3 separate times despite clear weather forecasts. Rot spread through timber storage yards overnight. Livestock refused to cross certain roads leading towards the marsh. Workers claimed they saw pale blue lights drifting through the fog before machinery failures. Weeks later, 2 hunters were discovered wandering half mad near the reed banks, insisting they heard women whispering beneath the water. The newspapers blamed hysteria. The villagers blamed Catherine. But deep down, even the skeptics had begun feeling it. Something in Black Fens was changing, and Augustus only pushed harder. He spoke constantly of civilizing decay, and yet every act of destruction seemed to make the marsh darker, somehow more watchful. Even Catherine felt it too, especially at night. Some evenings, she stood at the enormous windows of the Vale mansion, staring towards the distant marshlands while thunder rolled beyond the horizon, feeling as though some invisible thread inside her were being stretched painfully thin, and Augustus noticed. One evening, he entered the drawing room quietly to find her standing motionless beside the rain-streaked glass. "You look unhappy here," he observed. Catherine did not turn around. He built a cage and mistook it for kindness. For once, Augustus' expression hardened openly. "You speak as though I rescued you from comfort." She looked at him then. "No, you rescued yourself from loneliness." The sentence struck him hard below the belt, and for several long seconds, the room remained silent, except for the rain tapping against the glass windows. Then Augustus spoke softly. "You think my brother understands you because he speaks gently." His jaw tightened faintly. "But gentleness does not preserve the world, Catherine. Men like Timothy inherit beauty. Men like me will build civilization." She stared at him with genuine sadness. "And yet, you still cannot make the marsh obey you." Wounded pride immediately flickered behind his eyes. 3 weeks later came an incident, Timothy's arrest, and Augustus became almost impossible to reason with. The accusation had shocked all of Ely. It was a theft of the Vale diamonds, a collection of rare industrial crystalline minerals capable of stabilizing Fen resonance engines. It was considered an act bordering on treason against the company itself. Augustus presented evidence personally before the magistrates: missing vault keys, falsified signatures, witnesses' testimony placing Timothy near the restricted laboratories shortly before the disappearance of the Vale diamonds. The case moved too quickly and perfectly. Timothy realized the truth immediately. Augustus had orchestrated everything long before the trap closed, and Catherine realized something worse. Augustus never intended to let his brother live alive. The sentence came during a heavy rain. Execution by hanging in 3 weeks. That night, Catherine sat alone inside the conservatory. Beyond the glass ceilings, thunder rolled endlessly across the sky. And then Augustus entered carrying 2 crystal glasses. "You could still save him," he said quietly. Catherine looked up slowly. "You speak of mercy as though you invented it." Augustus ignored the insult. "There are conditions under which my charges may disappear." She immediately knew. Still, hearing it aloud made her stomach twist. "You want ownership," she said. "No," Augustus corrected calmly. "I want permanence. For years now, I have built factories, railways, entire districts, and yet nothing endures. Steel rots, fortune vanish, men die." His gaze settled onto her with intensity, but the marsh remembers everything through you. Catherine felt cold. Augustus leaned towards slightly. "Marry me." The words barely sounded human in that moment. "You would save Timothy?" she whispered. "I would spare him." The distinction terrified her, and somewhere deep inside herself, Catherine understood that Augustus had no longer cared whether she loved him or not. He simply could not bear the thought of losing her because of his precious excavation of the marsh. The wedding was scheduled within days. Ely celebrated it like royalty. Church bells rang across the town. Newspapers praised the union between industrial progress and the reclaimed jewel of the Black Fens. On the wedding night, rain battered the Vale mansion so violently the windows shook inside their frames. Guests drank nervously beneath chandeliers, while distant thunder rolled overhead like artillery. Catherine stood motionless near the ballroom staircase, dressed in pale silk so intricate it barely looked real. Yet, she had never appeared more sorrowful. Augustus approached her quietly before the ceremony began. "You could still choose peace," he murmured. Catherine's eyes drifted towards the storm outside, and she said, "There is no peace in possession." For the first time all evening, Augustus looked tired, simply exhausted by the endless inability to control what he desired the most. The ceremony proceeded anyway. Vows echoed through candlelight while rain hammered the estate roof above them. Guests applauded politely. Musicians played soft strings, and beneath it all, Catherine began humming. It was softly at first, almost beneath hearing, a melody without words, ancient and low, something her mother once sang beside the marsh fires long ago. As she hummed, the air around the hall began to drift and dance to her tune, carrying her voice in echoes around the hall. Gradually, the humming became louder, and the orchestra began to slowly reduce the performance. Several older villagers in attendance immediately stiffened. One woman crossed herself. Another whispered nervously, "That is the Fen mourning hymn." The chandeliers flickered, and then, somewhere deep beneath the mansion, came a violent metallic groan. The floors trembled. Guests froze. Another groan echoed louder this time, and suddenly, black water exploded upwards towards the lower corridors of the Vale mansion. Screams tore through the ballrooms. Flood waters gushed across the marble floors, carrying oil, sludge, dead reeds, and foul industrial waste Augustus' factory had spent all this time dumping back into the Fen rivers. The marsh had returned everything. Servants fled in panic. Music collapsed into chaos. Candles toppled into the black water, while guests shoved desperately towards exit. And in the middle of that catastrophe, the lower cells holding Timothy broke loose, setting him free. Catherine ran, barefoot, beneath the stormlight, straight towards the black fence. Augustus saw her disappear into the rain, and something inside him finally snapped completely. He followed her instantly, desperation and possessiveness guiding his every move. The storm over the fenlands had become monstrous by the time they had reached the marsh. Rain lashed black water into violent ripples. Blue lights drifted through the fog like spirits waking from old sleep. Villagers carrying lanterns gathered near the banks, terrified by the flooding. And there, in the middle of the reeds, Catherine stood motionless, rain soaking through her white silk. The marsh surrounding her looked almost alive beneath the storm. Then Augustus stumbled forward through the mud, screaming her name. "You did this!" The villagers recoiled as he pointed towards Catherine with shaking fury. "She poisoned this town with superstition, with manipulation. Look at what follows her." Timothy, recently freed amid the chaos, pushed through the crowd immediately. "Augustus, stop this!" But Augustus barely seemed to acknowledge his presence. "She bewitched all of you," he hissed. "Can none of you see it?" And then he grabbed Catherine violently by the arm. "She belongs to me." And in the struggle of that, Augustus struck Catherine in the face so hard the sound echoed sharply through the storm. Everything went still, even the wind, and for one impossible second, the entire marsh seemed to pause. And then, the black fence erupted. Reeds bent violently in impossible directions. Blue light mists burst across the waters. Mud shone beneath the villagers' feet, while deep vibrations rolled through the pit like something awakened beneath the earth itself. Panic exploded through the crowd. People screamed and fled backwards. Augustus stumbled away from Catherine in horror as the ground beneath him softened rapidly into black water. "No!" he yelled out. The mud swallowed one boot, and then the other. Augustus tore himself free and ran blindly into the marsh, carrying a lantern with trembling hands. The fog swallowed him almost instantly, while the humming and roaring returned softly through the reeds. He ran breathlessly deeper into the marsh, scared to madness like one being thrashed by nature. The mist and the blue lights followed as they disappeared one by one, deeper into the fence after him. And then his lantern went dark. Shortly after, the black fence fell silent. By morning, Augustus' veil was gone. Only his boots remained near the waterline. The town never recovered fully from what happened that night. Some insisted Augustus drowned naturally during the storm. Others whispered Catherine had cursed him. Weeks later, Timothy stood beside Catherine outside the old cottage ruins as fog drifted slowly across the reeds. "Did you kill him?" he asked quietly, in a way that didn't seem like someone scared or pointing fingers. Catherine remained silent for a long moment, and then she looked towards the marsh. "No, but the fen hears what men bury inside themselves, and eventually it answers back. Timothy never asked again. Years passed, and slowly the black fen softened around them once more. Timothy and Catherine rebuilt the old cottage together beside the marshlands. There was laughter there eventually, books stacked beside windows, pressed flowers drying between pages, and the footsteps of their child racing across the wooden floors. And for the first time in her life, Catherine belonged somewhere without fear of being attached to it. And perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. As the blessing of old age came by, Catherine died quietly during winter while rain tapped softly against the cottage roof. Timothy never recovered from losing her. Weeks later, unable to bear the silence anymore, he began sorting through her belongings alone. Inside her private closet laid old journals, astronomical sketches, fragments of forgotten folklore, written carefully in Catherine's delicate hand. He smiled through tears reading certain pages, and then he found the old music box, the same little brass mechanism he had repaired for her decades earlier. Something rattled strangely inside it. Frowning slightly, Timothy opened the hidden compartment beneath the gears and froze. There, wrapped carefully in dried marsh seeds, darkened by age and mud, was Augustus' old signet ring, his initials still engraved inside. The very same ring Augustus had been wearing the night he vanished into the black fens. Timothy stared at it for a very long time without breathing. Memory after memory returned suddenly. Catherine's silence, her final words, the way she had watched the marsh that night. Slowly, horrifyingly, realization widened his eyes. It was not certainty, but then a possibility. Because after all those years, the woman he loved most in the world may have carried one final secret to the grave. And somewhere beyond the cottage windows, the reeds whispered softly beneath the wind, like the black fence itself had chosen to keep the truth forever. And we've come to the end of the story, which brings us to the chilling psychological question. Is a person truly wild because they reject society, or society is wild for trying to cage a soul that belongs to the earth? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you're ready for the next forbidden record, make sure you've joined our circle by subscribing and turning on post notifications, and let's uncover these secrets together. Thanks for watching. Bye!